With the permission of the President and with the permission of the distinguished sponsor, I'd like to ask a few questions, if I may.
With pleasure to my senior brad in the Upsilon, Mr.
Be
President.
careful, because brads are now a dangerous, predicament. Kasi you consider the Lex Talionis.
That is true, Mr. President.
Now,
Lex Million.
Lex Billones. Billones. I did not say that. Senate President Drilon said that. I suggest we take it out of the record. Now, Mr. President, the coconut industry represents 3.5 million farmers. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. President.
And about 20 million families. Is that correct?
20 to a little over, yes, more than 20 million, but around that number, Mr.
But they have remained poor.
That is correct, Mr. President.
Why have they remained poor? Is it because of the levy alone, or is it because the government has not really provided the wherewithal upon which they could improve their lives?
Well, Mr. President, I believe it will be more of the latter, Mr. President, that
The government has failed.
yes, has failed to provide the necessary interventions so that the farmers' incomes increases, the latest technologies are employed so that there is value adding to the product. By and large, Mr. President, the main crop is still copra, and copra is the lowest in terms of value adding for the coconut industry, Mr.
But of course, there are other things that make that happen. For example, is there still a monopoly within the coconut industry that corners the price of coconut meat, for example?
Mr. President, I'm not aware of a monopoly per se, but I would like to think, Mr. President, that the big traders.
Excuse me, I understand that there are three. I'm still trying to get their names. There are 3 or 4 big buyers of copra meat that manage to keep the prices low and keep the people poor. They buy low and they sell high, or they process.
That is possible, Mr. President. Yes, there are big players that purchase these products, Mr. President, and are able to bring down the price, because also the farmer, the average farm size, Mr. President, would be around a hectare or a hectare and a half. Our coconut farmers precisely also don't have the clustering which will allow them to have economies of scale. And so therefore, Mr. President, they are at the mercy of the traders and the buyers, Mr. President.
I think it's important that we understand the whole business of the coconut industry, because a lot of people depend on it and they remain poor, and they have been, as you say, exploited. I don't know whether you can term it such, because now they are rich by about 90 billion pesos.
Well, 100 billion, 90 to 100, yes, Mr.
100
President.
billion and change, yes.
That's correct,
Now,
Mr.
the
President.
ladies behind you, are they from the Philippine Coconut Authority?
No, they are from my staff, Mr. President.
Is there anybody from the government representing the coconut industry?
Not today, Mr. President.
Well, I ask that because it's important for us to know what ails really the coconut industry. If there are people who are cornering the market and keeping our farmers low, and we know, you and I, the gentleman knows as much as I do, that there are people who corner rice, who corner sugar, and coconut.
Yes.
And I just wanted to find out, and I hope that you would favor me, the gentleman would favor me with an information on who these people are, so that we could really
We will.
unpeel this very, very bad banana.
We will do so,
that's
Mr.
being
President.
faced upon us.
We will do so, Mr. President.
Thank you. Now, when you talk about the coconut industry, how much land does the coconut constitute the coconut industry in this country?
Around 3.5 million hectares, Mr. President.
And how much does Indonesia have?
We don't have the information now, Mr. President, but
Yes, I'm sure.
it would be much larger, Mr. President.
Yes, I understand that I've been asking around that Indonesia represents at least 3.5 times or 4 times much more than the coconut industry of the Philippines. And yet, when you look at the production of coconuts, Indonesia produces 18.3 million tons of coconut, and the Philippines is the second in Asia, and they represent 15,353 metric tons, which means that with limited land, at 3 million, we're able to produce, and the chart will show you, much more than in Indonesia that has plenty of land. I think it speaks for itself.
Yes, Mr. President, that is correct.
So it really means that we're not really paying attention to the productivity and the value added that must go into coconut industry, the many products that it produces that can make people rich. We are sticking to the tingi market. Kumbaga ko na yung patingi-tingi pero yung talagang medyo dapat pasukan ay dapat hindi na papasok. Bakit ho kaya? Why is that so?
Mr. President, again, because of the lack of support for the farmer, they are limited to the supplying the raw material, which is precisely the copra. The strategy really is to provide them the necessary technology, the training, capacity building, so that they can do value adding of their products, not limited to copra alone, which is 50 pesos a day if they are to do copra. But, for example, if they are to do cocoa coir or cocoa nets or virgin coconut oil or cocoa water, Mr. President, then the value of these products are infinitely or much more, much larger, Mr. President, than just copra, Mr. President.
In other words, Mr. President, it is quite obvious that the problem lies in the fact that we have not really supported the industry, not just the farmers, but those who will want to invest in the coconut industry.
That is correct, Mr. President.
I mean, there are many rich people in this country that feel that the coconut prices are too low. They are not going to break a sweat to try and invest their money, and they would rather invest it in some place where they would get quicker returns.
That is correct, Mr. President.
Now, having said that, Mr.
Yes.
President, nonetheless, I will stand corrected here. I'll correct myself. Indonesia has 10 million, actually 3.5 times more than our land devoted to coconut. And Malaysia, which is number 10 in production, they produce 646,000 metric tons. They have 6 million hectares, which means that we are definitely infinitely more productive than our Asian cousins. So maybe the problem is to try and nudge government to try and pay attention more to the coconut industry, rather than coming up another time, another bureaucracy. And I'm not, the jury in my case is not out on that yet. But is it not true the reason why people are discouraged from going into the coconut industry is the science or the value added that can be generated in the coconut industry is not being undertaken? Who are the leaders? Who lead the coconut industry right now? Is it the Philippine Coconut Authority? Is it the Ministry of Energy or rather Environment and Natural Resources? Or is it Ministry of Agriculture?
It is the Philippine Coconut Authority has his primary primary mandate to develop the coconut industry, Mr.
So it would appear that the Philippine Coconut Authority has failed abysmally.
In that respect, yes, Mr. President.
What other respect are we supposed to take?
Well, yes. Well, Mr. President, that is correct. When we stepped in, for example, and took over the chairmanship of the Philippine Coconut Authority, 50% of our coconut trees were nutrient deficient. Around 18% of our coconut trees were senile, meaning old. And 80%, Mr. President, of our coconut lands were monocrop, meaning the only crop was the coconut. All these, Mr. President, will tell us that precisely not enough was being done to address the challenges of the industry and the coconut farmers, Mr.
And yet, in spite of that, in 2015, we produced more coconut than everybody else. And if we use the science of creating, as you say, value added, we should be making a lot more money in coconut.
That is correct, Mr. President. Just to cite an example, we produce 15 billion nuts.
Is that literally? Does that include people like here
That
in
does
the
not
Senate
include
Congress?
people in government like me, Mr. President.
Yes.
But that is 15 billion nuts is the estimated amount of coconuts that we produce annually. And each coconut, or 5 coconuts, will give you 1 liter of cocoa water. And therefore, if you divide it by 5, we actually have 3 billion liters of cocoa water annually. Yet, of that 3 billion liters, Mr. President, because of the lack of technology, the lack of capital, as pointed out, the investments, maybe 2 billion, this is just off the top of my head, Mr. President, because the largest producer of cocoa water in the country is producing anywhere between 300 to 1 million liters of coconut a month. And
I agree with the gentleman, Mr. President. Precisely because Thailand produces much more coconut water than we do. And yet they don't even figure they're number 9 in coconut production. Brazil is number 4. And yet they produce a lot of coconut water. And
Yes.
in fact, the previous president in the last administration said that we should now have a future in coconut water. But obviously, that has not happened.
yes, around, well, almost 3 billion liters actually are thrown away because of the primary crop practice of securing the copra. So there is really so much wastage.
So we're throwing away a value-added commodity in favor of a low-value commodity,
That is correct, Mr.
which
President.
means, are we lazy?
No, Mr. President, I'd like to think there is lack, because securing the water, the cocoa water, is like the milk as a parallelism, perhaps, or as to compare it. You need to have the necessary technology to make sure that the cocoa water does not spoil.
Oil, yes.
And so you need to have capital to be able to get that. It's like processing, cold storage, processing of the cocoa water, ensuring that it is properly handled so that you don't have spoilage. It would be like the milk industry, Mr. President. You need to have equipment. You need to have the necessary pasteurization of the milk, Mr. President. And again, it is not easy to do that unless you have the necessary technology and the necessary infrastructure and equipment, Mr.
We
President.
did some computations with the staff, Your Honor, and for 5,000 kilograms of coconut per day, it will cost us 10.8 million to have a composting facility, 229,000 for cocoa water processing facility, which would include drilling bins, drilling press, water collection, receiving vessel, kawa, furnace, coconut preparation, inspecting, sorting, which is costs us a 1 million, and so forth and so on, feed tank, centrifuge processing. Doesn't sound like a big amount, Your Honor. It sounds like how much coconut water can we produce with 5,000 kilograms? I would like to be surprised.
My data is that for every nut, for every 5 nuts is 1 liter. So the average weight of 1 nut, I don't have the data now, but we can actually get it, Mr. President.
Maybe the gentleman can provide the Senate with that so we can make a better
We will-
purchase on how to make the decision on this matter that we're discussing now.
We will do so, Mr. President.
All right. At the same time, one of the key problems also is transportation, is it not?
That is correct, Mr.
The
President.
cost of transporting, and that's the reason why I attributed it to a little bit of laziness, or lack of entrepreneurship is the better phrase, not laziness. Meaning to say that they would rather have these middlemen who buy it for the copra giants or the coconut meat giants buy their coconut meat, pera na kahit na maliit ang kita, instead of coming up and the government helping them with maybe ways upon which they can transport their product to the coconut water facilities or to the coconut mills so that they can bring it to the market faster. Would that be correct?
That is correct, Mr. President. The challenge really, Mr. President, is to cluster these coconut farms. Because if they are clustered, for example, you have an average farmer would have 1 hectare. So if you have 50 hectares, then that will mean 50 farmers coming together. They will now be able to, if you cluster them and organize them into cooperatives or an enterprise, they can now spread the cost, for example, of a transport vehicle, instead of just one farmer having to figure out how he will transport his very small amount of coconuts to bring to the...
That would be a worthy cost to be pursued, wouldn't it?
Yes, Mr. President.
And at the same time, it would be a worthy cost to pursue if you were to educate the farmer into planting black pepper
Yes, Mr. President.
in between coconut trees, or
Cacao, Mr. President.
coffee.
Coffee, yes, Mr. President.
And this is really ideal for them, right?
That is correct, Mr. President. It is unique. The scientists have said that the coconut tree is actually if there is a social animal, there is also a social tree.
A social what?
A social tree. The coconut tree is supposed to be a social tree in that if there are more crops around it, its yields improve, Mr. President. And so it's ironic that 80% of your coconut lands are monocrop.
Precisely. We seem to know the problem. We know that we need transportation. You know that you want to do value added. If that is the case, why can we not use the money for Coco Levy for these matters, for these things?
This is
in a cogent manner.
Yes, this is precisely the purpose of this measure, Mr. President, is that the Coco Levy Fund will be used to fund the Coconut Enterprise Development Program, which will be included actually in a coconut industry development plan to be approved by the President, Mr. President.
Well, that is precisely the problem. I think, would it not be better if we force the coconut industry, PCA, after all, they're paid, they're an agency of the government. If they're not doing their job, why don't we force them to create this coconut master plan instead of us creating a law in which we are going to create another bureaucracy? Instead of keeping the money, let's say you have a bank that is 77% controlled by the government, UCPB or San Miguel. Why don't we leave the money there first and allow it to grow some more? In the meantime, get the coconut industry, Philippine Coconut Authority, to come up with a master plan, because I don't see that master plan happening with this new administration, quite frankly.
Well, Mr. President, in fact, there have been previous master plans put together with the help of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. The NAPC, the National Anti-Poverty Commission, went through a process of consultations, putting together the roadmaps. But I think in the end, all these roadmaps are left at the level of the theoretical per se, which now requires precisely, if the gentleman was, if I am correctly understanding the gentleman, that the PCA should be able to put together and execute.
Yes, Your Honor. Are we bereft of continuity and consistency that we can actually utilize the agricultural education program in our country so that all these things can be planned together with the, let's say, the SUCs, the UP, the Agricultural College, and have one big meeting and say, all right, we are going to have the Empire Strike Back. We're going to be number one in the coconut industry. We're going to be number one in value added. We're going to have a plan so that the farmer will have that ability to live himself by his own bootstraps, allow him to get, multivariate crops so that he could do that. And why can we not do that with the SUCCs, Mr. President? To my mind, my suggestion is to put the SUCC to work. They have enough professors there in agricultural colleges all over the country. And if we use them as a way upon which you could provide them with money, then they could be the extension. I do not believe the Philippine Coconut Authority is possessed of sufficient extension workers to reach out to the farmer. And when they reach out to the farmer, it is not just the science, but also the attitude, the philosophy, the culture that if they plan big, they can get bigger returns. Would that be a more feasible way of doing these things, Mr. President?
Mr. President, we agree that the academe, the SUCs, should play a critical role, an important role in being able to provide the necessary technology, the necessary capacity, and also, yes, as mentioned earlier, the training, so that we can change paradigms in terms of the thinking of farmers, coconut farmers, Mr. President. In fact, the Trust Fund Committee precisely is tasked to execute or implement the development plan, which should include the role of SUCs in the coconut enterprise development programs, Mr. President.
That's precisely why my problem is I do not want to create another bureaucracy when there is already a bureaucracy tasked to handle that. And in fact, they were preempted by the private sector masquerading, let us say, somebody is a group that would be good for the farmer. I don't know. I don't know if the jury is out there yet already. You cannot argue. You cannot argue with success. They have 100 billion. They have a bank that is controlled now by the government. They built the cultural center, the Coconut Palace, and many other things. Of course, these were extravagance to some people, but nonetheless, there are things that can be seen from the Coconut Fund that was utilized. And if the Coconut Fund is now utilized for the purpose of really overhauling the coconut industry, providing it with the transportation, providing universities with all the necessary technology, the money to research and to conduct extension work for the farmers, then I don't see why a country that can produce a lot more with little land than Indonesia and Malaysia and Brazil, but cannot even create their own coconut water that can be exported abroad. I don't know why we cannot do that and create a better mousetrap than creating another bureaucracy. Yes. You know, we always solve the problem by creating another bureaucracy, as if it is going to go away.
Yes.
It has been said that we are a task force-oriented society. And there's a problem with a task force tokhang, for example, task force, you know, whatever. But in reality, what you need is predictability, consistency, and continuity.
That is, Mr. President, in an earlier interpellation of Senator Recto, he also raised the question of whether or not we're creating a new layer of the bureaucracy.
In fact, I talked with them about that. That's why sabi ko ikaw na mauna dahil pareho.
Yes, yes. And he said, why don't we just strengthen the PCA, perhaps, lessen the number of members of the Trust Fund Committee to, instead of 5 or 6, just a smaller number in terms of the government representatives. I said, we are more than willing to look at a possible harmonizing of strengthening the PCA, and therefore at the proper time. I said during the period of amendments, we're more than willing to look at that so that we can avoid the concern that we are in fact creating a separate bureaucracy when maybe it would be better to strengthen an existing one.
So the Director and I talked about this before we even interpolated, and we both agreed that we may be creating another bureaucracy, another hydra, meaning to say it's different heads and then not knowing where to go. I support your intentions, Mr. President, the intention of the gentleman, but I wonder if we can really finesse it in such a way where not just will they the PCA will concentrate not only on coconut products such as, you know, copra, but really put their mind, put their gray matter, put their money on things that would strengthen it, like, as you say, transportation, multi-cropping, or for that matter, coconut water, and other things. That should be their mandate.
That is correct.
And we should try to get the best and the brightest.
In fact, Mr. President, when I was, again, chair of the PCA, there is actually a portion of the coconut lumber that, not the entire lumber, but for lack of a better term, the premium lumber, which can actually last decades. It can actually be used for building homes that would last. It's endemic, indigenous. It is an indigenous material, and they say can even be and it's even stronger than metal because it doesn't rust. In other words, with the right technology and the right science, Mr. President, we can actually use the cocoa lumber for homes that are that will be sturdy and long-lasting, Mr.
In
President.
fact, Mr. President, this representation heads the Red Cross in the Philippines. And I get money from the international community of the Red Cross or the Federation, or I'm a governor of the International Federation. And with the money that they gave us, we use cocoa lumber.
That is correct.
And we've already built over 140,000 homes. In Yolanda alone, 78,000. I'm not saying that's to crow over it, but we use cocoa lumber. In fact, we have a hard time, Mr. President. PCA gets in the way. There are a lot of fallen trees.
The debris, yes, Mr.
And
President.
if they rot, they're useless.
That's correct.
Why can we not say, in cases of disasters, humanitarian organizations that intend to build homes can now pick up these trees right away and report post facto what they picked up, instead of giving them a very bad time trying to pick up the trees. In the meantime, we lose the war, and now the cost of the house has jumped up.
That's correct, Mr. President.
And it's really tragic that we don't think about these things, because we could have built a lot more houses, because every time that we build, it gets higher and higher. And again, middlemen come in. Yung malalakas sa PCA, they get the lakad power to make it happen for them. Sa kanila kami mapipilitan bumili. At lugi naman yung mahihirap, because instead of providing them with other things, basic house and comfort rooms na lang ang maibibigay, and water, samantalang kung mabilis yung coconut tree na bumagsak, maibibigay. That's one of my first observations. The second observation is, when you were in the Coconut Authority, or when the gentleman was in the Coconut Authority, there were several typhoons, like Typhoon Pablo. And the coconut trees fell like pickup sticks as I flew over Davao Oriental, those places that were affected. And I don't know, did the Philippine Coconut Authority immediately come up with a replanting program for those fallen trees? Or for that matter, in Yolanda? Or for that matter, in the recent typhoon?
Yes.
Doon sa Bicol, ano ba yan? Nene ba yan? Or whatever. We have so many of them.
Yes.
And I see all the time fallen trees. Or in Cagayan de Oro, a lot of trees were fallen. I have never seen the Philippine Coconut Authority come up with an emergency program to allow the farmer to plant new trees, new seeds. And at the same time, as they're doing that, pinapasok na natin yung black pepper, yung cacao, yung kupe,
That's
black
correct.
pepper, and all that. Because they're Visayans. That's how they pronounce it. Para maintindihan tayo.
That's-
But that is the case, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, we agree. In fact, for the information of the good senator, I came in after Pablo as chairman of the PCA, and after Yolanda, and we were surprised to, as I came in, there was still 1.8 billion. I came in 2014, Mr. President. There was still 1.8 billion worth of Yolanda funds that had not been spent because, well, for some reason, and that's why we had to do some catching up. There were like 10 million trees that were felled by Yolanda, and it took some time, Mr. President, before the debris clearing was undertaken, but we had to fast-track it. And we had to employ, as correctly pointed out by the good senator, it was slow. And we had to employ a new technique, and we had to ensure a new technique in cutting these trees so that we could finally clear these Yolanda-stricken areas in Region 8 of the debris. And we were able to achieve it, Mr. President, but it meant that I had to go to Region 8 every 3 weeks for 3 months or 4 months just to get the latest in terms of the debris management in terms of debris targets. We really had to push the PCA to move, and and when they knew that I would be back 3 weeks later, I would ask for updates. That forced their hand in that respect, Mr. President, and had to deliver.
So in reality, Mr. President, it is up to the leadership. We
That
can
is correct.
create another bureaucracy, pero kung marupok ang leadership, mahina ang leadership, wala mangyayari. So kailangan talaga, you need a whip, so to speak,
That is correct, Mr. President. In the
para
same,
magawa lahat yung program. Because I'm looking at the budget of the Philippine Coconut Authority, and there's a report here that says PCA was found to be underspending when their allocated budget expanded to 4 billion per year in 2014 to 2015. The agency lacks the capacity to absorb and utilize large funds.
yes, Mr. President.
So having said that, it might be a better way, a better mousetrap, if we delegate some of these powers to the SUCCs in the area so that they can immediately use the funds and make them accountable as we go along. Would you agree with that, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President?
Mr. President, we are willing to see the proposal to be able to strengthen or expand or provide the necessary synergy between the PCA and other agencies or offices like an SU.
In fact, Mr. President, even as I speak here, when we try to solve the so-called EJK killings, and we have that all the time, it would be the recommendation of this representation, and I've asked if I could ask the Majority Floor Leader and the President if I could already sponsor what we have recommended, and if we could pass on the report of the Committee on Justice, so I can already sponsor, for example, surveying every killing in every province that must be reported to the Committee on Justice and Public Order, so that if you have 200 killings in one area, then you know you could actually go right away and attack them right away, so that it doesn't have to go higher, so that we would not have the opprobrium of the international community. And I would like to reiterate that as a commercial here while I'm conducting my interpellation. And I can see, and I'm glad that both gentlemen, the President and the Majority Floor Leader, are nodding their heads, because we really have to see our way clear in making these decisions. And going back to the matter at hand, if you had the same situation here, if you're able, let's say, to give the SUCCs the kind of money that they would have, and they would have a scorecard at every month, every quarter, they will be able to report how many farmers they have educated, how much have they distributed in terms of black pepper or cacao or coffee. Then we will know na may nangyayari. Kung hindi makaya, we cannot wait until the crow has white feathers. So to my mind, these are the things that I think will make this proposal move, Mr. President.
Mr. President, we will, at the proper time, we will look at the proposed amendments as to in terms of structure and organization, and we are more than willing to make the necessary accommodations.
Thank you, Mr. President. If you look at the Kaanib Coconut Intercropping Program, they had 155.98 million. Seems like a very paltry amount. They raised it to 200 million. But we don't know what has happened to these amounts. It would be nice if the SUCCs would be able to monitor what the PCA gave and say, all right, ilan ang naitalim nyo, ilan na ngayon ang kinikita ng farmer. Would that be possible, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. Actually, Mr. President, the Kaanib program is the PCA's providing farm inputs, equipment to the small land holdings, Mr. President. So that amount of 200 million would include decorticating machines, fertilizers, ano pang binibigay nila? Seedlings, Mr. President, and the like. We're more than willing, again, Mr. President, to look at the proposed amendments in order for the strengthening of the organization, Mr. President, to achieve that.
Just a point of information for the body, Mr. President. We lost 15 million trees in Yolanda alone. That's an awful lot of coconuts. 15 million trees in Yolanda alone. And that is in a very poor community, which
Yes.
explains why among the poorest provinces, coconut regions are represented by 4 provinces, including Tacloban, Maguindanao, Leyte, ano pa? Southern Tagalog, Quezon, Bicol.
Bicol.
So you can see there is the urgency needed to address this problem.
Yes, Mr. President.
I would support the gentleman if we would go and push harder so that we can get life change. You know, politicians always say life will change. But, you know, the president cannot do that alone.
Yes.
Congress can do that, and we should, you know, make sure all our bases are covered so that you can seal all the holes where the rats in this country can go in and out and do their plunder upon us. And so having said that, Mr. President, let me just go back now to an old issue. And this is the matter of the people who were contributed to the levy. I have here documents from the United Coconut Planters Bank that appears to be like shares of stock. And this was in return for, this was taken from Unicom, UCPB, 54 shares, UCPB, 16 shares, to a certain Demetrio Reyes Tolentino, who gave 88 shares, 71 shares, or a total of 1,257 shares. I guess they are brothers, Demetrio Tolentino. No, they're one and the same. They have a total of 1,257 or 1,500 shares, Mr. President. And I have the documentation here. Can they now go back to the government? The government having said, the Supreme Court having said that this is in the form of taxes.
Yes, Mr. President.
Therefore, it belongs to the government now.
Yes, Mr. President.
So what do we do with the poor farmers who were swindled, so to speak, in quotes?
Well, Mr. President, the Supreme Court ruling precisely said that the levy was in the form of a tax, and therefore it cannot be, it is government funds rather, and cannot be given to private persons in that respect, Mr. President. In fact, if I recall correctly, the Supreme Court also ruled that the issuance of these shares of stock was invalid, Mr. President. And therefore, well, the strategy really now should be, moving forward, is to get a survey of the a registry of all coconut farmers and make sure that the fund will be made available to the development of the coconut enterprises, for example, and these farmers and their organizations will be the beneficiaries, Mr. President.
Well, when the government says the issuance shares of stock were improperly done, this is right under the noses of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which means that these were a violation of the securities law. Would you say so? And which means that the government was remiss. And the theory being the government was not doing its job. It created by their negligence a humongous swindle, if you will.
Well, Mr. President, at that time, there was we would like to think that it was a presidential decree that that allowed for this, and the decision of the board, and so there was, in that sense, a presumption of regularity until the courts intervened, Mr. President.
But you know, it's all post facto, isn't it?
Yes, Mr. President.
And in the meantime, the government failed to protect the farmer or the people who were swindled.
That is correct, Mr. President.
And is there any light at the end of the tunnel for these people who have grown old with their shares of stock, holding mere scraps of paper?
Well, Mr. President, with respect to individuals per se, the money cannot be allocated to them, but the Senator Cynthia Villar had requested that we put social protection appropriations. This would be could be healthcare, Mr. President, could be insurance, could be scholarships, Mr. President.
Well-
So that would be the manner in which you would be able to address that, although not directly, Mr.
You know, this can be akin to a problem that happened after World War II, when the President Roosevelt said any Filipino who takes up arms against the Japanese will be given veterans benefits.
That is correct.
And of course, after World War II, this was announced, and a lot of people went in, hundreds of thousands who didn't really fight the war were suddenly now representing that they fought in the war for America and for the Philippines. And so much so that they rescinded the proclamation of President Roosevelt because the Americans were able to document what they called the Missouri List, that listed down all the veterans, the properly documented and properly how do I say it, properly recognized veterans. Having said that, Mr. President, can we not do the same here?
Well, Mr. President, I'm more than willing to look at a proposal, Mr. President, that should not be in violation, of course, of the ruling of the Supreme Court. That's why we felt that perhaps the social protection allocation, budgetary appropriation or allocation for social protection, such as scholarships, health care for our coconut farmers, would be one such track. But I'm willing to look at a proposal that, as long as it's consistent with and will not eventually be declared as unconstitutional, we're more than willing to figure out if such is possible, Mr.
Well,
President.
Mr. President, I just want it out because I think I had to bring it out. You know, I have this bad habit. And I see things that are wrong, I don't keep quiet. And I always say what is in my heart. That has guided me well through the years of service to my country. And the times that I hesitated were the times I was wrong. So I will not hesitate on this matter. So thank you very much, Mr. President, and I hope that you'll favor me with the amendments that we're going to propose so that you can have a better law insofar as this is concerned.
Thank you, Mr. President. We will ask our committee secretary and our staff to coordinate with your staff so that we can look at how we can craft the amendments as manifested during the or expressed during the interpellation. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Gordon.
Thank you, gentlemen.